Hello and welcome back to the Listening to Your Gut podcast. If I told you that I just was mind blown, you would probably be shocked, but I am mind blown right now because Rachel and I have just had some epic conversations prior to hitting record, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Rachel Brooks today. She is a woman of many talents, of many skills, of just many loves. I mean, talk about the fact she created this incredible book, which we will touch on today. She's a podcaster. She's the founder of The Confident Woman. She's got an apparel line. So many incredible things going on in her world, and I'm going to let her talk about that here in a little bit. But I first want to just say that I was connected with Rachel. I want to say, Rachel, I think you know this better than I do. I think it was right before you said the pandemic, because I was at one of the events that you hosted and was just like, wow, this woman is badass. And then not only that, but like to know that she was in my sphere of like, she's local. She's a local woman. So hot damn. So I since then have been like, secretly stalking her, watching her, seeing what she's doing. I listened to her podcast. I just recently read her book. And now I'm excited to bring Rachel on the podcast because we're going to have a conversation that's going to go, I think, many different ways. We're going to talk about many different things, but all of which are so relatable to me, to Rachel, and I know to you as the listener and the viewer. So I know that was long-winded, but welcome, Rachel, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. This has just been incredible. I mean, from our paths crossing, gosh, I think when you talk about our first event, that was almost 5 years ago.
Holy
And
cow.
then, yeah, it's like once you start to build that momentum, there goes lockdown. Nobody could leave the house. And I was like, oh man, how are we going to do this? And, it's the irony of that having us be local, that our paths crossed again. And here we are having this incredible soon to have conversation. We're still in the intro because before we hit record, we had this beautiful conversation that has probably taken more than we wanted to or expected to on our time. But I'm just grateful to be here and just really, really honored to be a part of your podcast to serve and your listeners and your community as well.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I think the world of you. You are someone that I aspire to follow in so many of your footsteps because you show me what's possible. And like we were talking about before we, officially started recording, the women that you bring on your podcast are just so incredibly relatable to me. And what is shared on that podcast is so incredibly relatable to me. And I know many women who listen, which is why we listen. But so I just want to thank you for that. And I also just want to thank you too for being so real and raw. And I mean, it begs me to bring up this book because I just finished reading it. Your book called Chasing Perfection. I, first of all, am a recovering perfectionist. I think many of us women are. I don't know too many women who have not been down that path. And hearing your journey and you just revealing a lot of really scary things to reveal, right? Like as a woman, to share the things that you shared, but to be open and show how you've moved through those things, show how you've forgiven yourself for things that have happened in the past, show how you have become a stronger woman from going through the things that you've gone through. I just commend you for that because not every woman does that and can do that. So just thank you for being an open book the way that you are.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I know that a lot of the things that I share inside the book, and we won't go too far into like the spoiler alerts of that,
Right,
but
right.
it was pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But to be honest, at the forefront of the book was I was well aware of that towards the end once I finalized the book and had made note that this whole writing process was so therapeutic and cathartic
Mhm.
because when we're able to write, we set ourselves free.
Yeah.
And when there's no shame and condemnation centered around all that has happened to you, you flip that script and realize that your story, your life's experiences are there to teach us something. But it's so empowering when we can give back and recognize that our story, our experiences, our past, our traumas, dramas, all that stuff
Yep.
has really happened for us. And that has been the greatest gift that I've been able to not only give to myself, but had been something that I wanted to give to others that were just like me going through something similar. And when we talk about our journeys and our stories, while they're so uniquely different to each individual, the
Mhm.
through line is still the same
Yeah.
because we all feel pain, we all feel hurt, we all feel loss, but we also feel joy and love and gratitude and just the moments of the highs. And
Yep.
so when you could really capitalize on those moments, that's the human experience. And there's no shame around that. It's about living life and how quickly we can get back up from those setbacks in our lives.
I appreciate you sharing that because I 100% feel that in, me dabbling with also writing some of my own books. None of them are published yet, but um, some are related to health and wellness. And I do feel that it is going through that process of writing is very therapeutic, does help support the healing process. But then I think it's such a great gift. Whereas, journaling typically is just between you and yourself, right? But creating a book allows it to support you, but then it's a gift to the world too because it allows other people to start their healing journeys too. So I love that.
Yes, thank you. And that was I remember at the time when my I was working with a book writing coach and she had said, "Do you know who you're writing this book for?" And I was just starting out and in the context of the book, I remember first and foremost when I was asked to write the book or was told you're going to write a book one day and I was just like, "No, I'm not. Like, who am I?" Like I mean, I shut that down real quick. And then it came back up again and I was like, "Wait, what's going on here?" And then 5 times I was told you should write a book.
Wow.
And in that, after now the seed had already been planted and it's like, okay, well, how do I go about doing that? I mean, who am I to write a book? Who am I? I'm not an expert. I'm not a writer. And I had all these, who am I not, right?
Mhm.
So I realized that that was the language that I was speaking to and about myself and everything that was coming out of my mouth at that time was so negative. And I started questioning myself like, wait a minute, if this is the same person who's saying who am I that I can't do this or I'm not qualified or I'm not equipped, well, what if I could be that person? And it was just that little tweak, that shift that said, well, then who am I not to, but who am I to?
Uh,
And that was the moment when she had said, who are you writing this book for? I said, maybe it's for one person that I can help. It was just literally a lofty goal. I just threw up on there. She goes, no, no, no. Who are you writing this book for? And I paused and I said, myself. And she said, exactly. Because when you can write your story, you own your story. And that's the most empowering gift you give to yourself, which is now the gift that you give back to others. So when we keep rejecting or denying or placating or minimizing everything that's happened in our lives, we're withholding information, lessons, wisdom, insight that we can share with somebody else that can help shortcut their journey. And I always look at that as a disservice to humanity if we're holding on to that for what? For our own insecurities. We're afraid to be judged. We're afraid of this. We're afraid of that. And I realized that fear had held me back for the bulk of my life, hence why I didn't, it's all told in this story in my book.
yeah.
But I realized the greatest overcoming of fear is to face your fear. And when I just said, you know what, I let people judge me. I've judged myself as hard as I can be. I've been my own worst critic, I'm my own worst enemy, my own worst everything. And nobody can defeat that because we live in the lives that we are today.
Yeah.
So you have the full view of everything that's happened in your life.
Yeah.
Nobody knows you. They meet you where you're at today and they think they know you from what you have done. So
Yeah.
for me, when I'm so secure in my story, that's the confidence that I want every woman to be so deeply rooted in her own self-confidence that it doesn't matter what you say or what others think or any of that stuff because I've lived my life. And just like you've lived your life, you know the ins and outs of who you are. And so there was really just the undoing of the shame and the guilt and the pressures and expectations and the fears and insecurities that we really unpack in the book to really help that individual overcome those adversities in their life as well.
I love that you shared that. And just again, thank you for the way that you created this book too, because at the end of every chapter there are thoughts to ponder, and that is, I think, a missing piece to a lot of books that are, memoir style or, self-help supportive. It's like, yeah, let me share my story with you, and then it'll be left to your own devices, right? But I love that you have questions for us to think about at the end of every chapter, and they really left me thinking. Sometimes it was like I had to come back day after day to look at those questions again and be like, I still don't know the answer to that, but it begs you to dig deep and really to start thinking about who am I, and to trust yourself in that process of digging deep to uncover those parts of you that you've maybe shoved down, to your point, that people don't know about you, but you need to bring them up to show the full scope of who you are, and also to live your life to the maximum potential that you can. So I thank you for that as well.
Yeah, so thank you. That was honestly, I had zero intentions when I wrote this book. In fact, had zero intentions to even write the book. But
Right.
I love that you called that out, because that's really seeing the true intention behind that. And I appreciate that, because as a creator, you hope that it translates into that for your
Yeah.
listeners, for the readers, for anyone that is consuming what you create, that I hope that they see the intention and the purity behind my heart as to why I wrote what I wrote, because it wasn't about me at this
Ah,
point. And it was a journey of that self-discovery, from the woman I started out in this book to the woman that, even today, is a completely different version. And it shows the constant evolution that we as individuals go through in this journey we call life.
I want to say too, I mean, I feel like I'm going to say this over and over. I keep commending and applauding you for this, but something that we've chatted about prior to recording, you bring it up in your podcast too, is, you are coming back to, and you just mentioned it now, you're coming back to this book and learning lessons from this book even several years after its debut, right? And I think that's the beauty of reminding ourselves that this life is not, you reach a plateau, or you hit a, an accolade, and then you just keep going. Sometimes we have to, go back to a couple steps previous, or you can think of it in like the life cycle I like to think of a like a butterfly. We're constantly going through, this evolution, and we come back around to a new rebirth, so to speak, in different phases of our lives. And so I appreciate you, showcasing that in the way that you conduct yourself, in the way you share on your podcast, and just in everyday life. Because I think oftentimes and I'm speaking for myself too, we as women think like, okay, once we've reached, once we've passed this hurdle, we don't have to deal with it ever again. It's gone. We've learned the lesson, and voila, we're moving on to the next thing. But that's not reality. We constantly are going to go back to things that we've, stumbled through in life. And we're going to learn different lessons from those things, which I think begs me to ask you this question, which is, you know, in your book, you talk about the fitness competitions that you have been part of, and that were a large part of your life. And I would love to know, like, from those fitness competitions, you share some of it in the book, but what, looking back on that, have been some of the biggest lessons that you've learned about yourself and just
Mm.
about life in general?
Great question. I love when we bring in fitness, because fitness literally is a metaphor for life.
Mm,
Fitness is a journey. Fitness is about mindset. It's about self-discipline. It's about self-control. It's about goal setting. It's about working consistently day in and day out. It's a slow, tedious process where we live in a world now. It's just instant gratification. We recognize now it's like you get a YouTube video and you're like, oh, well, this is like 3 minutes long. This is too long, because we're so quick for, 15-second clips, or overnight sensations, overnight success, overnight. Everything is just so quick. Fitness will teach you how to slow down, trust the process. But in that process, it teaches you to trust yourself. It
mm,
allows you to show up as your best self that day. And that best self will change day in and day out. There's
mhm.
days where I'd show up and I'm literally at like 3%, but I gave it my 100% of that 3%.
Yeah.
Then there's days where it's like I wake up and I'm lit and I'm on fire and I got 110%. So it's about meeting yourself where you're at on a day-to-day basis and not looking at it as I have to get to this goal by a certain date or else. What
Yeah.
is the consequence if you don't meet that?
Mm,
So when we look at competitions, figuratively and metaphorically speaking, they're setting you up for success.
mhm,
But then what is success? How do we determine and define success?
mhm.
Right. So that's constantly on our radar because what we think is successful from the outside looking into other people's lives or from the inside looking out to other people's lives, we start to compare. And when we have a disconnect saying, well, so and so did it, or they have the quality of life, or they have what I'm aspiring or want to achieve, it brings us back to the beginning and we start to give up. That's that defeatist mentality because we're now looking at other people and comparing them where we're at today. But when we focus on the day to day, that's the journey, that's the fitness. We're putting in the reps. Consistency compounded over time yields results. What are we showing up consistently with action? How are we showing up consistently as our best selves? What are we speaking to and about ourselves on a daily, consistent basis? So it's really a mindfulness game because everything we need to scan from our concept of self-awareness to what we eat, to what we watch, to what we can consume as far as food and beverages, to what we're listening to. Where is our headspace at? So all this ties into because these are things that I had to do in preparation for a fitness competition.
Yeah.
And as a former fitness competitor, it's training as an athlete, and an athlete doesn't shortcut. An athlete takes great discipline and preservation of their life.
Mm,
So this is the duality when I started looking at my competitions as a metaphor for life. And I said, wow, so if I can discipline and control what I can eat, to what I could think, to what I'm consuming as far as the people in my life, to the thoughts in my head, to the food and beverages that are going into my body, to the music that I'm listening to the books that I'm reading, to everything. Now we start filtering and unpacking what no longer serves us because I can't bring in all that toxicity. I can't bring in that negativity. I can't bring in that damning thoughts and the past of things onto a stage and expect to win or perform at my best.
right.
So what stage are we metaphorically preparing for our lives for today? That's the question I ask my readers.
Whoa, hello. Mic drop. And I mean, to your point, yes, mindset is a critical piece. And I kept, as you were sharing, I kept thinking too, equating, or trying to compare like, movement and like you said, showing up maybe 3% one day and close to 100% or 100% another day in your movement or your fitness can also be translated to your mindset. Some days 3% is going to count as a success because that's all you have to give. Whereas the next morning you're like, hot damn, I'm ready to go. And I got 100% mindset ready to go. And that day becomes a success. So it's like you said, the way you view it becomes your reality of
Mhm.
success, which I love. I love that the way that you redefined success. And to that, I think begs us to talk about, I told you before we hopped on the mic, I'm moving into this, more of a less of a hustle, anti-hustle culture, if you want to call it that. Um, yeah, kind of state of mind mentality. And so I would love for you, because I see you doing all these things, but I also know that you're preserving yourself and your mental and physical well-being. And so how do you combat those times where you feel maybe more inclined to be like, oh, let's get back into, like the hustle of things? How do you combat that pressure? And like, what do you do when those feelings come up?
Another great question. And to be honest, like I don't have the perfect answer, but I'll tell you the seasons that I'm in.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the one of the biggest takeaways for those that are listening is that I just share my experience. And there's a lot of times I have a lot of setbacks. And for the anti-hustle culture, and to be honest, I jokingly call myself like a seasoned burnout junkie. I've been burned out way too many times, but eventually, it's the first time you're like, damn, that sucked. The second time you're like, how did I do this again? Right. So you kind of, and that's why I say I take lessons out of my own book. And I literally just reread my book just like 2 weeks ago because the lessons in there, not only is it feel like those are lessons applicable to today, but I kind of went into this time approach as if I didn't know the author of the book.
Mhm.
It's weird because I'm listening to my book and I'm like, I don't even know that girl. Because I had to turn off what I think that I would already know so I could be open to receiving the information that Rachel, former self, could teach this new version of Rachel in today's season.
Yeah.
So the anti-hustle culture, or just anti-hustle, and the irony of my title, which is chasing perfection. So the chasing is the expended energy. We're chasing after something. We're striving for something, because otherwise we're just stuck. We do nothing. So
Yeah.
chase is the movement. It's the direction of where we're going. Perfection is, it's that elusiveness, that if I just had everything perfect, then finally I'll be enough. Then finally I'll have rest. Then finally people will like me. Then finally I'll get that promotion. Then finally, right? So if everything was just perfect,
Yeah.
just so everything was in order, I would be enough.
Mm.
And it's not about you having to chase perfection, but where in those areas are you chasing after something with those feelings of fulfillment?
Mhm.
So that's what I beg to ask my readers and my listeners. What are you chasing after? Because that hustle will always be that internal flame that is constantly on all the time. And we can't sustain that. We're
Yeah.
humans. We have seasons of rest. We have seasons to go hard. We have seasons to pull back and enjoy the fruits of our labor. We
Yeah.
have seasons that sometimes we're not even on the business, but we're helping others because we have overcome. So when we give ourselves that permission to just be, we tune into what really our physical being, our mindset, our emotional well-being, but more even so, our spiritual well-being.
Mhm.
And that's a missing component, I think, is in a lot of the mix, is that we're spiritual beings living a human existence.
Yeah.
What is our spirit and our soul longing for? But when we're constantly output, we don't take a look at the input. What
Mhm.
are we actually after? So the hustle culture is damning and is toxic and is harmful, and it could just really set you back and knock you down. And if we have that defeatist mentality, we're just going to stay there,
Yeah.
or we don't have that confidence or that resilience to get back up and say, well, that sucked, but I'm going to try again because I'm determined.
Yeah.
I know that there's got to be another way. So it's about getting back up, trying it again. And even though you're going to fail countless times, that can't be the end all be all. And that can't be your story. So
Yep.
the story constantly continues, but it's up to you to narrate, to direct, to produce, and star in your own story in
Mhm.
a way that is conducive for the betterment of your overall health and well-being.
I love that. And thank you so much for bringing up the spiritual piece, because you're right. We don't, I mean, I didn't bring that up, right? I just talked about the emotional and physical piece of being, but spiritual is also a crucial part of who we are. And I think too, I love the way that you took that and shared your thoughts on, moving away from the anti-hustle, because I think if we do tap into truly what our soul desires. I shared with you, my soul is desiring to support animal welfare more, and I've shoved that down for so long, but I know that my soul is craving that. Like it's begging to be birthed, something to support in that way. And I think when we start to listen to that and we start to take those steps towards it, there isn't hustle towards that, because you are you are self actualizing what needs to be done,
Mhm.
what you really want to do, that you've been shoving down for so long. So I love your thoughts on, anti hustle, and just really tapping more so into that intrinsic of what are you feeling, spiritually wise. Like, tap into that piece, because it is so often pushed to the wayside in this, you know, society where we are almost pre-programmed to go, 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 do all the time.
Exactly. And that's, we're not machines. We're
No.
not meant to produce and perform on a regular 24/7 basis.
Yeah.
And I think that as a high achiever and a high performer, which hence, we look at a recovering perfectionist, recovering people pleaser, all those things, is because we're on a performance-based level.
Yeah.
And we can perform, but we also need to rest. And that rest is such a crucial part. And of course, there's kind of some warnings and signs and things like that as you're approaching that hustle too hard, because you can sense this internally. And so when we look at, again, I've really built my life on a 4-pillar foundation, which is told into, I talk about it in my book, but I took it even further into my journal, which is Fit from Within. And it's 60 Days to Finding Freedom is the name of the journal, but I really harness on those four pillars, which is the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health and well-being, because our physical becomes a byproduct of that inner fitness. But when we're so externally driven by the results, that's where our spiritual misalignment comes in, and that's where that longing and craving, and we have this like this hunger for more, but we don't know what that more is. And we think, oh, well, I just need to produce more or earn more or do more, or it's something more of the output versus the input, to just be, tune in, and listen to that nurturing side of it. Because that's where, we can't always push out. Sometimes we just need to receive. And that receiving starts with the first permission to give yourself that rest in that place to receive.
Absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. Beautifully put. And I mean, you and I, again, I will probably say this many, many times in the future, because I know you and I will be connected for quite some time. But there's so many things that I connect with you on, you know, a toxic connection to fitness at one point, you had, I did as well. Toxic connection to food was something that you had, I did as well. So I relate to that. Again, perfectionist tendencies, people pleasing tendencies. I think a lot of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, and you hear me saying this, you're like, wow, I connect with Kelly and Rachel on those things. I've been through those things. I think most of us have, or maybe you are currently dealing with that. And to that I say, there is light at the end of the tunnel, because Rachel and I have both come out of those things and are much better for it. But another thing that I connect with you on is, loss in life. You and I both have lost significant people in our lives. Your brother, myself, my mom. And so I don't get to chat with a lot of people that have had that life experience, because you and I are relatively young to have had experienced those types of things. And so I'm curious, what has, loss in your life helped you to um, just find more of yourself, but also just what have some of those lessons of loss taught you, just in the general existence of life, and how precious it is? And I don't anything that comes up for you, because I definitely want to share a little bit of that with you and the listener, myself, but I would love for you to start that off.
Yeah, with loss, and when there's love and loss, there comes grief. And grief is anything that was a part of us. It's a part of our identity. It's a part of who we are, from the intricacies of our makeup. I mean, when we lose our family members, the DNA of coming from your mother to the DNA of my brother, it's like these are intricacies woven into who we are as individuals. And when I lost my brother 14 years ago, it was something I now had to recognize in my life at that point. Again, the book was written several years after his loss, and I didn't realize this until I was kind of in the midst of writing the book. I was like, wow, what a revelation came from this. But for every loss, there's a gain. And I know that that might sound a little odd, because you're like, man, that was loss. That's heavy. Like, how could you even think positively about gain? And I always look at it as like, when I looked at my brother's loss, he was such a huge part of who I was, and I found my identity in him.
Mm.
And when he was no longer there, it was just kind of like the rug was pulled out. I was like, ooh, people see me. Like, who am I? Like, what's going on? And I had to turn that negative into a positive, and I saw after the silver lining. And that was kind of the first thing. The silver lining was one of the first things that I started seeking in other areas of my life once I discovered that for my brother. So I looked at life being as fragile as it is, that could be taken at any moment, and I had to ask myself, is this really what I'm living for? To be broken, damaged, to feel used, abused, misused by others? Is
Mhm.
this the value that I inherently am worth? Is this the value that my brother, who lovingly cared so much for me and about me, is this how he saw me? And I had to take a step back from the situation and assess it from a different perspective. And in that loss, I found the gain of having a purpose, a gain of meaning, and a gain of identity, that I could still establish something for myself, that I could still discover who I am, that it's never too late. Even though life again is short and can be taken at any moment, if we don't intentionally show up to live with, on, and for a purpose, then we're not treating this life that we're given here such a short time to fulfill that purpose, to fulfill our God-given gifts and abilities, and ask myself, why am I here?
Yeah.
So those questions, what the questions, the three fundamental questions that I ask my readers in this book are the three that I had to ask myself. Who am I?
Yeah.
What's holding me back? And why? Why am I here? Like,
Mm.
what is my purpose?
Yep.
So when I looked at that perspective of the loss of my brother, I said, now, who am I? I was not just Jeremy's sister or the girl who lost her brother. I didn't want to be as part of that as my identity. So who am I? I had to create a new story for that.
Yeah.
What is holding me back? Well, the fear of what other people are going to think. I'm just using this example for
Sure.
context.
Sure.
And then what is my purpose? Like, why him and not me? Why am I still here?
Mm.
There's got to be something
Mhm.
that I'm here to serve out for the remainder of my term on this life.
Yeah.
And when we look at love loss, there's such a heaviness of grief. There's different stages of grief. There's I mean, it goes from darkness to pure light on the other side. But I think overall it strengthens us. It sharpens our character building skills. It strengthens them as well to allow us to discover things that we didn't know about ourselves, to know that we can hit a capacity that we didn't even think that we can love to that ability.
Yeah.
And it expands and stretches us into areas of our growth and our potential that we wouldn't have otherwise been privy to or had taken for granted, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, but it had taught me so much. And, as I kind of prepare myself, the older I get, and knowing that if I lost one sibling, there's others, or even my parents, and that life is not something to take for granted because we're not promised tomorrow. And each breath is an opportunity that we'll never get back. So what are we doing here today in the moment to get us closer to where we're here to serve out that purpose?
Gosh, I love that. And I second everything that you shared because, I didn't realize what you just shared about having to find myself after my mom passing. I didn't realize that until probably about 4 years ago. It took the pandemic for me to really slow down. That was the first time it really allowed myself to slow down because we weren't doing a whole lot of anything, right? And the second she passed, it was like, okay, let's hide the sadness, let's hide the guilt for what could I have done to maybe keep her here longer, all those things that run through your mind. And it was just, let's just keep plugging and chugging, because if we put blinders to it, we don't have to think about it, right? And so I have found my purpose through, the last 4 years, realizing that yeah, she did pass, and she has given me so much that I'm able to express in my own human existence. But also, I think you kind of hit on this too. There are things that I realize now that, like, wow, she was such a lover, a lover of people and a cheerleader of others. And I have recently taken steps back and thought about, wow, I didn't realize, but I've just naturally done that myself. And a couple people recently have shared that with me of like, gosh, you are just always like pumping me up, like telling me I can do anything, like inspiring me to go for my goals. And I'm like, wow, I really am, because I genuinely, you and I have that connection of doing that for other people as well. I know you do that. You've done that for me today, before and during this podcast. And It's really cool to see that, you know, like you said, there's loss, but there's also gain. Like I have gained, I think, so much more appreciation for the life that I have. I've gained so much more appreciation for what my mom bestowed upon me in terms of, you know, the values that I have. And I know, as well as I'm sure Jeremy is looking down on you too. I know my mom is looking down on me and thinking, you know, hot damn, like look at you go and doing these things. And, you know, we're making them proud. You know, I think when you say, you know, why me being here and not Jeremy, right? And I could say, why am I here and not my mom? It's because there is something that we were meant to bestow upon the world, and we were meant to, in some way, shape, or form, live out part of their legacy. I fully believe that. So I just love that. Thank you for sharing that. It just makes me connect to you all the more, because I truly have instilled that belief in myself, of that, you know, we have stuff to gain. We have many things to gain from their loss. And yes, there are going to be days where we wish they were here. Most days we wish they were here, right? In fact, I can't think of a day that I wouldn't want her to not be here. But we come back to this reality of, but they have gotten us to this point, and now we are going to carry ourselves the rest of the way and light the world up in the way that we were meant to, because that's what's meant to happen. That's our destined path. So just thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And you just said something that I want to touch upon too. And I know that we talked about this before hitting record, is
Sure.
that, you know, when we look at the loss, and we can look at it as like, what was the intention behind, not, and I don't want to say like intention is like a, you know, misconstrued here, but the intention of how we start rebuilding ourselves after loss.
Yeah.
And you talked about legacy. And when we look at leaving that legacy, because we are the people still here, we're trying to live out our obligations, our purpose, but also legacy, giving back to those who lost their lives. And we know that, hey, you know, I want to do them good because I'm doing myself good, and I want to live out intentionally what I'm here to do, and that is to serve and to love others.
Yep.
And I think at that point, it was kind of hard for me to see that, because it's like, you know, we're in the midst of our own grief, we're in the midst of our loss, and I'm thinking, I don't want to help anybody. I can barely help myself.
Yeah.
But these are the stages of grief. And so, kind of to your point, you've recognized that a couple years later after your mother's loss, because we try to numb out or distract because we don't want to feel. And
Mhm.
feeling allows us to actually tap into something that is one of the greatest gifts that we get to give back to humanity. And that is empathy, compassion, understanding, love,
Mhm.
kindness, gentleness, all the fruits of the spirit. So again, tapping into that spiritual element, that spiritual being that resides in all of us, we now look at loss as that is the gain, because now I'm a better person out of this.
Yeah.
I've had to endure such heartache and pain, that I know what it's like to live on the other side of that, and that is to give and serve and love. So we talk about, like, you know, impact or legacy, or finding that freedom, fulfillment, that purpose. And prior to us hitting record, you said, I want to talk about redefining success. And I'm like, I'm all for it,
Yeah.
because that's the biggest thing, is that when we look at success and achievement, we tend to correlate the two, that the more that we produce and perform, the more we achieve, the more worthy we are, the more valuable we are, the more that our life has meaning. See, I'm living intentionally with this purpose. So my brother had passed, but look at me, I'm achieving. Right. So we could take that in two different directions.
Yep.
And I'd been guilty of that in my own season, because it's like, I didn't realize what I was doing until you kind of get to that point and you're like, damn, this is what it is.
Mhm.
And so, you know, intentionally now in this season, so for context, my book, Chasing Perfection, was about redefining who I am, because I
Mhm.
didn't know who I was. I had no idea who I was. I was just a whole big old mess, and I was just like, whatever. Read the book, you'll see it. And and now I find myself in a season where I'm redefining success,
Mhm.
because what I find is that success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And
Mhm.
that is a quote by Tony Robbins. And when I read that, I was just like, there it is. There's the lesson. The same lesson that showed up in chasing perfection is the same lesson that's shown up in this season of my life, is that I'm chasing now the achievements because I can,
Yep.
because I'm a doer, I'm a performer. I can achieve things, but at the end, where I reached to the top of what quote unquote my checklist, my bucket list, the things that I wanted to achieve, and I got to that top and I said, this is it. This sucks.
Yeah.
Like this is not how I imagined.
Yeah.
It's lonely. It's burned out. I'm burned out. I've lost a sense of direction, purpose, and identity once again. And now it was like, well, what is success? Success now in the season that I'm in is about finding freedom and fulfillment. But what does freedom and fulfillment actually feel like, look like? And is there a tangible outcome that I know that I can when I achieve that? Right? Because we want to see, we
Yep.
want to, it's hard for us to believe what we cannot see, but that's where faith comes in.
Right.
Faith is a big piece of who I am.
Yeah.
I'm very faith-based. I'm rooted in Christ. This is who I am. So
Yeah.
now when I look at faith, there's freedom and fulfillment, because that is who we are, fulfilling that spiritual element in our life. Because our spiritual being does not want anything of this world. It already has everything it has inside.
Oh, ah, Rachel. Goodness. Goodness. So well spoken, so well said. I I mean, there are no words. There are no words. I'm left speechless from that, because that is the truth, you know? I mean, if you are wanting for anything, I think, I hate to say it, if you're wanting for anything, you're doing it wrong, right? Because what you need is already within you.
Mhm.
You just have to pull it out of you and share that gift and start that thing and live it and breathe it and share it with the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
That just gives me so much inspiration, which you've already done a number on me today in such a good way. So thank you for that. But as we start to wrap things up, and you're going to have to come back because there's just so much more to chat about. But as we begin to wrap things up, I would love for you to share with women. You, again, you have the podcast, you have the book, you have a community, the Confident Woman community, you are hosting in-person and virtual events. Can you please share with the women listening in how they can get connected with you, how they can start to be in your world, whether they're locals like we are, you know, you and I are pretty local to each other, or not? How can women start to join this movement? Because it really is a movement.
Mhm. Yes, thank you. And I've made it very simple. You can find me on all social media at I am Rachel Brooks. And my website is also I am Rachel Brooks. And the
Mhm.
irony of that is, once you know who you are, that's
Yeah.
who you become. So the I am is helping to empower you to create your own story. So that story is the gift that you give back to yourself. And the Confident Woman is a place where we provide community tools, resources to empower you to become that best version of yourself. So we have in-person events, as Kelly had said, here local in Columbus, Ohio. We also have virtual opportunities to connect. We have, gosh, there's many touch points on that realm. But you can find everything on my website, iamrachelbrooks.com. And of course, my podcast is the Confident Woman Podcast. And my book is available everywhere books are sold online. And if you don't want to read it, that's great. No excuse, because I'll read it to you on Audible. So there's literally no excuse. Like, I'm an excuse. I'll shoot them down, right? So,
Yes.
but really, if you consume anything that I've created as a content creator, as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, as somebody who is just so engrossed in loving and giving and serving, that if you come across anything of my space, please reach out to me. I literally am an open book, and my communications are always open. I love connecting with individuals because I want to know that the work that we do is creating an impact and making a difference.
Yeah.
And even if you don't like anything I create, great, tell me that too. Like, I just want to connect. So yes, awesome. But I am looking forward to us continuing this conversation, or even a part 2 of this podcast, but being in each other's space as well.
Absolutely. And I also just want to say too that I was hemming and hawing whether I was going to reveal this, but you know what? We're going to reveal this because Rachel and I chatted about this before we hopped on the mic. And if you were in attendance of the virtual summit this year or not, no worries because Rachel is going to be part of the virtual summit next year. So if you want more of Rachel, I mean, first go connect with her. But if you want to see her as part of this virtual event, you're going to get to see her in the virtual event next year because she is signing on to be one of our incredible speakers. So I am so honored and just so ecstatic that you're going to be joining us. And just again, Rachel, thank you for being who you are. I absolutely adore you and am excited to hopefully see you in person at this upcoming event that you're hosting in August, and just to be in your sphere a whole lot more. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kelly. This has been an honor. Thank you.
Yay.